Hello, everyone. Welcome to Stories That Work. I'm your host, Deacon Adam, and pretty excited to be back 2 weeks in a row. We're going to continue with a theme here that we started last week because we are in the middle of launching and have launched the St. Athanasius Academy online classes for both secondary and post-secondary. And when I was at the Antioch Convention, I think the number one thing I heard talked about over and over and over in every meeting was ministering to our youth. I heard it numerous times. We heard it during the General Assembly. We heard it during the clergy meeting. So this is really nice timing to be able to talk about subjects and classes for our youth. So our guest today is Father James Purdie. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me, Deacon.
And why don't you tell a little bit about yourself before we get into today's topic?
All right. I am currently the priest down at St. Basil Orthodox Church down in Hampton, Virginia. Before that, I was at the cathedral in Pittsburgh with then Father John, now Bishop John Abdullah. And I am what you would call a convert to Orthodoxy while I was attending the Presbyterian Seminary in Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. My wife and I came into the Orthodox Church. Actually, history had a large hand in our coming to Orthodoxy because we're the historical church. We're the Church of the Incarnation. We're the Church of History. So history was really on the side of the Orthodox when we were going through our theological struggles. So we're really grateful for that. Before that, I met my wife in undergrad. We met freshman year and didn't look back. We've got 3 children right now, Jude, Lily, and Dean, and they're growing up fast and, well, really fast. Born and raised in Rochester, New York. My father was a history professor and took us to every single Civil War site this side of the Mississippi for our summer vacations. So we would hop in the van and we pulled the pop-up trailer behind us and we would go everywhere.
Wow.
Yes.
I'm going to be in Rochester soon.
Oh yeah?
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
I think they're doing okay now. I love Rochester. I love the Finger Lakes where I grew up. But it's the type of place that had snow this past May. So as much as I complain about the heat down here, I'm not missing snow in May.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So to talk about our subject, actually, before we get into the subject, I'm gonna give people a little sneak peek if you don't mind, because I'm a super fan of Superman. And so right behind your head, we're getting little secret glimpses of your Superman mug, which I love. I think that's awesome. And I parent with Superman. Like I teach them things that he did right when he had to make a difficult decision. But I want you to tell them about your previous mug.
My previous Superman mug.
Yeah.
I found it in the church hall. I don't know where it came from. It was here when I got here. Nobody claimed it. It was just sitting around. So I started drinking out of this Superman mug, which was not quite as big as the one I have back here, but it was still pretty big. And people would comment about it and say, well, Father, that's a lot of coffee you're drinking. And I said, yeah, when I drink this amount of coffee, I become like Superman and I can leap tall buildings and I can fly in the sky all jazzed up on my coffee. And I kept it around because, like I said to you before, it reminded me of Seinfeld, because Jerry Seinfeld always had a Superman figure in his apartment, and you would see it almost every episode. So,
yeah, that's exciting. Yeah, that's an important part of American history.
Yeah, I suppose it is. Yeah, cultural history and artistic history. Yeah.
So I alluded to our topic a little bit earlier, but talking about it's related to youth, but we're having you on today because I think part of there's so many different things we want to teach our youth, especially related to the Orthodox faith. But a big aspect of that is history. Mm-hmm. And so you are one of our tutors for the St. Athanasius Academy coming up this fall, and you will be teaching world history for high schoolers.
Yes.
And you're going to be teaching it from a slightly different perspective than I think most might be used to. And so I'm just excited to get into this topic. I remember when I finally fell in love with history. It took a longer time than it should have. But once you start to understand what history does for us, it just takes on a whole new life of its own. So I don't know how you want to open up the conversation about this, but the floor is all yours, and I want to hear from you about history and our youth.
All right. Well, first, I'll tell you a little story that happened to me around the time that I was going to be ordained to actually the diaconate at first. Metropolitan Philip of blessed memory, he came to the cathedral in Pittsburgh and was serving a hierarchical liturgy. Before the service began, before matins began, we were sitting in the altar, and he asked me what I'd like to study, and I told him history. And Siedna said that was wonderful, and how much he loved and appreciated history, because he said a historian has to know everything. He has to know something about everything. So it's not just memorizing facts. It's analyzing events and how they affected the culture. He said a historian has to know something about mathematics. We're going to talk about cathedrals. You're going to talk about ancient monuments. You're going to have to bring up something about even just mathematics and how something like that is possible. How can you make something like that? You have to know about philosophy. You have to know something about language. You have to know about geography. You have to know even about weather patterns. So it's an all-encompassing subject. And for our youth today, I think it's something that is very much lacking. There is a lack of appreciation for history, because we're so focused on the present, and we're so focused on the individual, that we sometimes run the risk of losing a broader and deeper perspective of who we are and where we come from. So history really it ought to be informing our present and giving direction to the future, and that is something that our youth desperately need. They need to understand the past, how it is affecting and shaping their present, and what they can learn from it moving forward in the future.
Well, if I think back to one of my history classes, and I'm not going to say which one, just in case my professor is watching. Unlikely, but you never know.
Unlikely.
I remember
people we have watching. Yes.
Yeah, I remember a particular history class that all I really wanted to do was take a nap. Like it was just droning and dead and boring, and so. I'm worried that there might be a number of our students that when their parents sign up for this class, they're kind of thinking, oh, history class, and so I know that. What is your plan, or what is your approach for these students so that they can develop an interest in history and understand the importance?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, we'll have, typical stuff, we'll have a book, we'll work through a book. We'll have discussions and do some critical thinking sessions. Yeah, I like telling stories. I like telling the unique and often strange stories that pop up in history. Sometimes they're really impactful. Other times they're just little rabbit holes, but they're still fun to go down. But really seeing how history is relevant to current cultural issues. That's what I'm hoping will get the kids excited, and seeing how history can be applied to their personal life, and say, here's how history is affecting you now. Here's some lessons that you can learn from it to tackle the situation that you're dealing with, or that you're going to deal with. I'm also going to be using a lot of a presentation that I put together. I put together a church history presentation that I taught at the local library here in town, and another local library down the road, which is very interactive. It's visually fun. It's got all of those stories already built into it, and it focuses on church history. So we'll be able to weave all that together and explore world history with a church history focus.
What specifically are you going to cover this coming semester in the fall?
Sure. So this coming semester, world history wise, we're going to start with what you might call the dawn of man. We'll work through some pre-civilization things real quick, and then we'll get into looking at some classical civilizations, Greek civilization, Roman civilization, especially those that affect us in Western culture. And we'll definitely be getting into the church history aspect, the coming of Christ, after working through a little bit of Jewish history, and then looking at church history in the Roman Empire.
And I think I touched on this earlier, but I want to come back to this because I think this is important, that you're going to be teaching it from an Orthodox perspective.
Absolutely.
And that's not something that most of our students are going to get. I'll share a short story before you go on to the next portion. My nephew and a friend of and another girl from our church were in history class at their public school, their high school, and challenged the professor and the textbook and said the textbook's wrong about what it was saying about Orthodox Christians.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And the teacher said, no, I don't think the textbook's wrong. And they were like, yeah, it is. Mm-hmm. And it took an Orthodox Christian to point it out, and they challenged. And I don't remember what the final thing eventually was, but when they showed it to us and the rest of the people at church, we were like, yeah, you're right. Like that was wrong in the textbook. Yeah. And so I'm just excited to have someone with a history background like you and an Orthodox priest with that theological perspective to be able to give history, that different perspective that this is something we're not going to get in our other schools.
Yeah, no, I don't think that you would. You might have a couple of teachers here and there, but it's not going to be something that's integrated into the program. No, not at all. So I'm really looking forward to doing it. And even considering some theological questions. Okay, here's what happened in history. Now, how can we critique that? How can we analyze that from the standpoint of our theology? What does that tell us about the salvation of man? What does that tell us about how we struggle with sin and with the passions? Is this event in history something that affirmed humanity in the light of God, or is it something that degraded humanity? So that's what I'm really hoping that we can have some really good discussions about.
Well, we have time for two more things. My last question for you is, I'm a little anxious to hear one of your stories. So do you have any that you're going to share this? Because I don't think we have any students listening, so you're not going to give one away. But any dawn of civilization, Greek, Roman, anything that you could share with us real quick?
Oh, boy. Well, let's see. The Cadaver Synod, that's always fun.
Real? Okay. Yeah, I don't know anything about this.
I'll break it down in just a couple of lines here. At any rate, some local authorities and clerics got upset with a previous pope and wanted to put him on trial as a sort of way of getting a power grab and setting up the people that they wanted to have in power. So they dug up the body and they put him on his throne and they had a trial for him. And this is pre-schism, so this counts as our I think it's pre-schism, yeah, as our own history. So this is something that belongs to everyone. So it's one of those wild stories.
Yeah. Father Ed Hughes sits around and tells stories like this all the time. I don't know if you guys have ever swapped.
No, I know. I think Father Andrew Damick is a big fan of the Cadaver Synod. I think I've heard him mention that one or two times before, and I've always wanted to have a discussion with him about it, but it slips my mind.
Well, that's leaves us time for however you want to close the session, whatever you want to say to viewers, to parents, to potential students. You have the floor to finish this up.
Okay. Well, I told you that my dad was a history teacher for 35 years, high school history teacher, and then my brother has since gone into the same profession, high school history teacher. I thought that would be something that I would get into as well, until I started really paying attention to one of my ministers growing up. I grew up Presbyterian, and the Presbyterian minister that I had growing up, as far as I know, he's still alive, but I kid you not, his last name was Presby. Uh, Presbyterian minister, last name Presby, David Presby. He was really good with us youth, and he was really good, at least from my perspective, teaching history. And I thought, I can do both. I can pastor, and I can teach history at the same time. This is bringing both worlds together, because I was already interested in ministry. I was already interested in history, and then when I saw it being manifested in this pastor of mine, both ministry and history, I thought, wow, here's something that I could consider. So my hope is that maybe there'll be some students out there that can see the union between history and pastoring, and how they're relevant and inform one another.
Do you remember how old you were specifically, or kind of what grade you were in when that really?
Yeah. So actually, I was probably in 8th grade, maybe 9th.
Okay.
So, but by the time I was in the middle of my high school years, I was really confident that was probably what I wanted to do, that I wanted to go to undergrad with a view of going to seminary.
We're losing you in your screen again. You keep.
Oh, I keep leaning back. I like to be casual in my my chair. So okay.
Well, I guess I asked that because I talked to so many people in ministry that they pretty much knew, even if they didn't verbalize it as a teenager, that that's the direction they were going to go.
Yeah. One time my grandmother just asked me on a car ride. She said, "Well, what do you want to do when you grow up?" And it just came right out of my mouth. I wanna be a pastor.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That must have been 7th, 8th grade, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. There's that's the 12, 13-year, age range there's something pivotal that happens there with men and them kind of really considering that calling. And it probably takes a while to cement or to even realize it's present, even to really pay attention to it. But
oh yeah. And it was one thing to know that that's what I might want to do. It was another thing to walk that path.
Yeah, absolutely. And then to tell people, that can be quite scary.
Oh I remember telling my friends one time that was what I was going to do, and they weren't particularly, religious folk. And I just said, this is what I'm going to do. Don't be surprised. And I need to start integrating it more into my life, and speaking and using words and languages, or not languages, but just language that's appropriate to that walk.
Well, I see a lot of comments. I don't see any questions. Sometimes we get questions. We got Deacon Justin saying hello. He's very excited. He's excited to see you. He said he's not so much excited to see me. And, is
that Deacon Justin McIver?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Deacon Justin's another good upstate New York man.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, not too, right next door in Niagara Falls, right?
Yeah, so growing up, I probably could have done Niagara Falls in maybe hour and a half. Buffalo in an hour, maybe the Falls.
Yeah, Buffalo. Yeah, from our perspective, it looks next door.
Yeah,
out here.
It is, sure.
And then we also got Andy Hall said hello.
Hello, how are you, sir?
Yeah, so yeah, it's we had some nice comments, and happy to talk about this. Like I said, I'm excited. My son's enrolled, and so if you're curious. Yeah, so my son's in the class.
Critiquing me, I'm ready.
Yeah, and one thing that parents are allowed to do, parents are allowed to silently audit the classes. Okay. We are going to ask that parents, so if you're interested in, your child is signed up and you want to kind of peek in on it, that's fine. We do ask that you keep quiet so that, the tutor and the students can have their engagement. Sure. And I say that mostly as a rule for me, not really other parents, because I would all of a sudden speak up and have questions and probably monopolized your time if I was in your class.
Well, it's good though that the parents can be a part of it in that way, and then they can ask questions and they can hear and see firsthand what their kids are learning, and then they can take the conversation to the dinner table or throughout the rest of the day.
Yeah, and I want to take that step further. It's not only allowed, it's encouraged. We would love for parents to sit on it so that what's exactly being talked about. And then, because what we're doing with, you've heard me refer to Father as a tutor. One of the philosophies of these homeschooling classes is that they are tutors helping the parents and the parents are still the ones teaching. They need some help in some different subjects. And so we've got Father James helping with history. We've got Father Fred Shaheen helping with English. We've got Father Paul Jurchis, who I interviewed last week, helping with virtues and passions. So you guys are bringing in some expertise help, but we're helping. That's our goal, is to really help in these key areas.
I hope so.
Yeah. So thank you for your time today. I'm excited about my son being in your class, and I'm going to make him watch this so he knows what to expect. And he'll ask you about the cadaver synod.
Yeah. Well, very good. Hopefully that's not the first question we get, but
yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to it, and I hope the students are as well. Yeah.
Yes. All right. Adios. Until next week.
Ciao.